Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to see that the prospect of a Brit standing up to talk about the weather hasn't put anyone off being here today. I must admit it was something of a shock to the system when I arrived here on Sunday afternoon, because on Friday, just a few hours before I left, our R&D centre in Cambridge looked like this. Temperatures plummeted to minus 8 degrees C, but before you all scrub Cambridge off your holiday wish list, I should say this is a very rare event. But the big thing is, how much notice did we have of this snow coming? Well, honestly, enough to get my warmest coat out of the back of the wardrobe, but not enough to take more evasive measures like getting a new central heating system put in. Hold that thought, that's relevant to the talk. To reassure you, I will also be talking about some other things I'm passionate about, innovation of course, and also research for innovation. Does anyone know who this is? I hear a few chuckles. Michael Fish. For anyone not familiar with this gentleman, he was the mainstay of the British daily weather forecast for several decades. In addition to his sterling services, or should I say, despite his sterling services to the BBC Broadcasting and to the Met Office, he is unfortunately best remembered for an infamous broadcast in autumn 1987. Just a few hours after he mocked live on air, earlier today a woman called the BBC and said she'd heard a hurricane was on the way. Well, if you're watching, don't worry, there isn't. Winds reached speeds of 115 miles an hour and there was devastation across the UK. Sadly, 18 people also lost their lives. This provides the first indication as to why I've chosen to use the weather as my metaphor for the innovation ecosystem today. This is our market disruption event. Despite all of our forecasting, all of our R&D, all of our scientific knowledge, we still failed to see this coming. Even with the lone voice of, let's call her a lead user, or maybe a startup saying, I think conditions are about to change. Do the experts welcome her vision with open arms? No, of course not. They discredit, they patronise. We're the market leaders, we're the experts in this industry. No one's ever heard of you. Go away. Even before the BBC, which is hard to imagine, I know, for thousands of years this very physical battle with the elements has driven human endeavour. People have been forced to find solutions to address the hardships of simply surviving from one day to the next, and increasingly, over generations, centuries, millennia, manipulating the environment around us to make life more easy, more sustainable, more comfortable, and of course, more convenient. We've iterated our solutions, sometimes incrementally, sometimes disruptively, to improve upon the most basic foundations of Maslow's hierarchy of need: warmth, shelter, clothing, and of course beyond. The weather, the seasons have provided probably the primary catalyst for humans to improve the experience of living, through personal innovation right up until the Industrial Revolution, and of course thereafter innovation for the masses. And the experience transition for the first time from personal innovation, surviving, to one where comforts and even luxuries became not just aspirational, but actually genuinely achievable. One of the great comforts in life is, of course, the product of the perfect hop. It's a challenging crop to grow well. It requires caring and attentive farming, and of course an ideal set of weather conditions through the spring and summer. Naturally, this is one of my favourites, the aptly titled Innovation IPA from the Adnams Brewery in Suffolk. As I consulted this important source of creative stimulus while making notes for this talk, a line from Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest, a play I studied at school many years ago, came to mind. One of his characters, Gwendolyn, backs me up on this premise of the weather being an important metaphor for other things. Pray don't talk to me about the weather, Mr. Worthing. Whenever people talk to me about the weather, I always feel quite certain they mean something else, and that makes me nervous. Innovation makes people nervous. It makes them nervous because it's risky. If we are pushing the boundaries, there is a high chance of failure. However, the people in this room aren't normal, and I mean that in the nicest possible way. To us, there is nothing more motivating than when a competitor or a startup comes along and tries to eat our lunch. We get seriously crazy excited by the idea of wrestling the unknown into some sort of creative order, by making connections between things that never previously existed before, by seeing failure as an opportunity to try again. And of course, these nerves provide us with the adrenaline that keeps us going and motivated until we eventually succeed. Now, music is, of course, another of the great comforts in life, so here's a weather-related quiz question. What is the weather connection between bands like the Beatles, Elbow, U2, and so on? And there's a bottle of my prized Innovation IPA up for grabs here. They're all places where it rains a lot. The weather's terrible. Did anyone get that? All right, I'll just have to drink it myself then. There is a long-standing music industry half-truth that the reason we have so many great bands coming out of places like Bristol, Manchester, Liverpool and Dublin is because the weather is shit. The joke is you have to find something to do with yourself. You get in a room with a bunch of mates, you start making some music, maybe some other things in a number of cases, who knows. Whatever the source of the magic, the result has been quite literally legendary. I found numerous other great quotes about the weather, this one by Mark Twain. Everyone talks about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. As I considered these, I had a bizarre thought that parallels could be drawn between much of this weather-related philosophy and innovation, particularly the kind that disrupts the status quo. Everyone talks about wanting to deliver breakthrough, but let's ask ourselves how much of our work is genuinely focused on that outcome. I'm not sure Mr. Twain would thank me for my efforts in this slide, and maybe I'd had one too many of the Innovation IPAs. Now, of course, there is a small minority out there genuinely disrupting categories and experiences, but if you look at how much you're able or maybe allowed to do with your time, do you feel it's enough to create a game shift in your category? One of the things about disruptive experiences is that for better or for worse, and I do genuinely mean for better or for worse, you will never be able to look at the world the same way again afterwards. I still remember loading computer games with a cassette. It was a truly multi-sensory experience. Does anyone remember this? Enough of that. Can anyone imagine someone from Gen Z accepting that as a digital experience these days? Or even, frankly, one of us now, except for some sort of novelty retro value. It took about 6 minutes to load, and even then there was no guarantee it would actually work. When you eventually got there, this was the graphical reward. The floppy disk moved the game on a jump. Solid state shifted expectations again. Dial-up internet seems an age ago. We even grumble when we get a suboptimal broadband experience. All around us, these traditional experiences are being disrupted, and of course it impacts on the way that we interact with the world. That can never be undone. Who has a Prime account? Once you've experienced next-day delivery from moving little more than the tip of your thumb, no other convenience shopping experience will ever quite match up. I was refitting my bathroom a few months ago at home. The family had been politely banished for the long weekend, the water was off, my preparations had been meticulously made. A glittering array of plumbing exotica lay before me. It was around 10:30 on Friday night when I opened a beautiful new grower mixer tab, only to find that the necessary male 3/8 inch by 15mm connector was not included. That's one of these if you wanted to know. Okay, you didn't, whatever. It's 10:45 p.m. now, a few swipes on the smartphone, and it was delivered at 9:37 the next morning, barely 11 hours after ordering it. This annoying little bit of brass had the potential to ruin my entire weekend. Instead, its arrival shifted my experiential world once again. Amazon not only realised this pivotal insight, but they acted upon it. They bought us Prime. They bought us Dash. I can't see a Dash button for a 15mm by 3/8 inch connector catching on anytime soon, and this image made me chuckle. At least one of these products is unlikely to be delivered as quickly as you really, really need it. But I admire the tenacity with which they're pursuing this core insight about the ultimate shopping convenience, the fastest delivery time. Exactly the same is true about their streaming services. The job to be done is receiving exactly the product or service that you want, no matter how demanding you are, how tail of the curve you are, exactly when you want it. The job is the metric of consumer performance that Amazon is measured on, and they're doing rather well at it. So well, in fact, that many businesses who might not have originally seen Amazon as a competitor are now starting to become aware of the threat on the horizon. Grocery industry, banking sector, pharmacy retail. 4 months ago, Amazon was awarded wholesale pharmaceutical distribution licenses in 12 states in the US. Like any other seismic event, there's going to be winners and losers. Pharma companies are likely to benefit from the increased efficiencies. Obviously, pharmacy retail, likely to lose. Here's the problem. It's not that we're bad innovators or we can't see killer insights or even, frankly, have great ideas, but often we aren't able to act on them in the way that we'd like because we're stifled by the frameworks in which we all operate. Corporate processes, brand guidelines, quality systems. Even our current customers can be a source of constraint. We need to move faster, but we need to be more successful, and this sounds like an impossible conflict, right? Dr. Bob Cooper, the guy who invented the stage gate process, published the results a few years ago of a study into corporate innovation activity. And in summary, it found that since the 90s, the number of new-to-world products has halved, while modifications to existing products has almost doubled. So, very crudely, big companies were reducing investment in breakthrough and biasing efforts towards category maintenance. Is it any surprise that disruptions from established companies are so rare? The problem is that the starting point is often a position of safety, and that position is both an elaborate process deliberately designed to avoid risk, and of course the current product or service portfolio. By contrast, the number of successful startups has never been stronger. It was estimated last year there are now well over 200 companies in the so-called unicorn club. These are companies with an estimated stock market valuation of $1 billion or more. What's underpinning this big core startup discrepancy? Well, I propose it's down to a number of things, and maybe two of the most important are the fact that, firstly, the way a problem is defined. With startups, there typically isn't any baggage. And secondly, the relative simplicity of the approach, let's call it lean, in which these businesses are setting about testing and iterating new business models. While often crude, the crudeness actually contains a kind of key to the magic, especially when fired into a group of early adopters who get a kick out of helping to make glitchy products better. And of course, software is getting very good at that at the moment. Now, of course, many big corps do realise that transformational ideas struggle in those traditional environments if they're grounded in the current precedent. And there are now a lot of internal initiatives to try and help step outside of that and act more like a startup. I don't know if anyone's heard of Adobe Kickbox, but if you haven't, I'd really recommend you find out a bit more about it. It's a fantastic initiative. It's a few slides since I mentioned the weather, so let me paint a picture. It's 2008, it's Paris, it's snowing, a bloke and his mate are trying to get a cab without success. Their names, of course, are Travis Kalanick and Garrett Camp. The two of them vowed there and then to solve the problem with a revolutionary new app. The idea was unbelievably simple. Push a button and get a car. That idea, of course, became Uber. The two entrepreneurs launched their new idea in 2010 in San Francisco with a few cars, a handful of employees, and a small seed round. Of course, we all know where the car story goes. But what really interests me is that Kalanick's vision is much more than being a better taxi service. He claims he never wanted to be in the limo business anyway. He sees the potential for Uber to be at the heart of what he calls a seamless, instant gratification economy with the smartphone as the remote control for life. If we can get you a car in 5 minutes, he says, we can get you anything in 5 minutes. Does this desire to dominate the everything economy ring any bells? Google, eBay, Amazon, Walmart. In the early days, Amazon just sold books. They were good, but replaceable. And of course, in the intervening years, Amazon's become almost indispensable. I really want to focus for a minute on that meteoric rise of Uber, despite, or perhaps because of, that deceptively simple vision to deliver on the job to be done. And it highlights, in some ways, despite the relative inexperience or lack of resource, sometimes startups have an edge. They don't have this corporate baggage. They focus on the single core thing, this highly targeted consumer job to be done. They have to be lean. They don't have the luxury of moving in any way other than quickly. But despite the corporate machine's best attempts to knock it out of us, this startup instinct remains at the very core of who we are as humans and as innovators. We instinctively have this skill to spot the job to be done and to act on it, and to move quickly when we need to. Let's say you're out and about, minding your own business, and you feel a few drops of rain. What do? That's right, of course, you consult an elaborate stage gate diagram, your brand guidelines, a number of technical specialists from different business teams, procurement, legal. Just a reminder, it started to rain, the drops are starting to run off your nose. You file an outline patent application for a new device for someone special in your life, your dog, your barbecue. An important reminder that just because you can file a patent doesn't mean that you should. By the way, you're getting really wet now. Put like this, it sounds ridiculous, right? We need to move quickly. We need to find a solution to the fact that conditions are changing. We're going to be soaked if we don't act right now. If necessary, we improvise. We reach for any available tools, no matter how imperfect, to get us to our next stop. And by the way, even if we've been organised enough to have the current state-of-the-art technology to hand, why do we always fall into the trap of thinking the current solution is the most optimised solution? Just because the design is mature, because it's been knocking around 100 years, doesn't mean it's the best possible solution. Innovation doesn't give a damn how many years you've been market leader. It didn't care about audio cassettes, or wet film, or heating controllers with a fixed number of itty-bitty little pins that you have to pop in and pop out when the weather gets hot, cold, intermediate, whatever, because something else came along that did the job better. Nest, of course, another great example of a weather-inspired innovation disruption. I've mentioned the term job to be done a number of times, and for those of you unfamiliar, I should perhaps elaborate. Harvard professor Clay Christensen spent much of his career looking at how to characterize innovation opportunity more effectively, and this phrase, in very broad terms, summarizes many years of thinking. When customers become aware of a job they need to get done in their lives, they look around for a product or service that they can hire to get that job done. The driving point of difference between a job-to-be-done approach and what I'll term generic market research is that it captures insights and needs in a solution-independent way. Now, solution independence is critical to breakthrough innovation because it allows us to look beyond the current technology or service. It's enabling today's experience. And of course, the pinnacle of success for any company is to execute the job so well that they become completely synonymous with it, the job category king. Let me suggest a job to be done, and I want you to imagine the existing brand that delivers perfectly on the job. The job is this: to furnish your home quickly, in a stylish and cost-effective way. How many of you imagined IKEA? Yeah, haven't they done well, eh? And of course, the specific solutions, the products, the services in their portfolio are constantly evolving to keep them at the top of that game. The reason I like the jobs approach so much is that it takes the blinkers off. It seems very simple as a principle, but of course, customers don't speak in jobs. The literal voice of customer can be, of course, hugely subjective, and it's grounded in today's current solution-centered experience. How many people use product X, how the pack opens, what the competition are doing with a variation on their existing product. The problem with market research is it's a bit of a rear-view mirror, perfectly characterizing the here and now, but not great at extrapolating to a distant future, especially one which may disrupt it. And of course, the problem is we so often rely on market research to inform those strategic decisions. By contrast, jobs to be done is what we see as the cornerstone of a research for innovation approach. And it lays the foundations for a transformational future because the job is a constant metric of innovation performance. By constant, I mean it doesn't change over time. I'd like to demonstrate how the job remains a constant even though the solution, the products or technology can change. I was fortunate to meet Mark Randolph, co-founder of Netflix, last year, and I was struck by a number of things during his presentation. He talked with great humility about the growth of Netflix from a small idea to a company in a lot of debt to, believe it or not, being laughed out of the boardroom at Blockbuster. Like many successful entrepreneurs, he talked a great deal about previous failures, about risk, and about what underpins a good idea. And I'll summarise briefly how, as an entrepreneur, he found an answer he could be confident in. Cast your minds back. It's the mid-90s, it's Friday night, you've had a busy week. You've cooked dinner, you've cleaned up, you settle back on the sofa, put your feet up, and suddenly the idea of enjoying a film at home pops into your head. What do? Streaming hasn't been invented yet. Mail-order DVD hasn't been invented yet. So, you head out into the dark, cold, wet night. You drive to the local video rental store. You get out into the cold, dark, wet night. You go into the store. You walk past the overpriced confectionery. You finally find the section of the store with a video in that you want, but it's not there because someone else rented it 5 minutes before. You have an argument with your other half about what else to watch instead. Finally, you settle for something else. You make it home. You fast forward past endless trailers to get to the start of the film. And then, remember videotape tracking. Did anyone spot any killer insights? Now, if only we'd been looking beyond the limitation of today's technology. if only we'd been innovating ahead of the eye of the storm. Mark was. He knew that enjoying a film at home was a job to be done, a constant performance metric. He instinctively saw that it was a highly undersatisfied opportunity. The current state of the art left a lot to be desired. And of course, that insight changed the future of film consumption forever and sealed Blockbuster's demise. So first videotapes that you had to collect from the store, then personal DVD choices mailed direct to your home, then streaming to the comfort of your sitting room. The solutions, the enabling technologies, constantly iterated. Critically, the job of enjoying a film at home remained a constant. And that highlights the importance of using this broad research for innovation lens rather than relying just on traditional market research to help imagine those new futures. An obvious next step for Netflix might be consolidation, bringing multiple jobs together at one time. Now, if only Netflix sold popcorn or can solve the argument over which film to watch. What was the first thing that Mark did to prove his idea? He took the lean approach. For the second time today, we've heard about Eric Ries, and he talks about minimum viable products and lean in his book, The Lean Startup. If you haven't read it, please do. Lean is about creating minimum viable test beds, spending as little time as money as you can to move you a valuable step forwards to your next stop in your innovation journey. And it sets about trying to avoid some of these issues with innovating in Big Core. Randall's first iteration in lean was to find a DVD, put it in an envelope, and mail it back to himself. Guess what? It arrived the next day. We all know what happened next. As I indicated earlier with my rain shower example, entrepreneurs and successful authors are not the only people doing lean. Who could fail to be touched by the images beamed around the world last year of preparations for the arrival of Hurricanes Irma and Harvey? I was struck by a number of things. That all of the images of people preparing showed perfectly pleasant weather. The current market conditions, if you will, showing calm, business as usual, except for the fact it was kind of eerie knowing through the wonders of modern technology what was coming in just a few days. In other words, too short a time window to do anything but resort to defensive action. When normal market conditions give way to an unexpected, catastrophic, disruptive event, it is rarely on your terms. In defence mode, people were focusing on the job to be done. The jobs were secure my home, my property, my family. The solutions included batten down, stockpile food and water. They were in startup mode. Resources were limited. There was an immovable deadline. People were being very collaborative. I doubt any of them were operating in, let's call it, day job silo mode. Fancy business titles matter little when you need to move quickly. It's about being organised, focused, and working together. They were being very resourceful, using whatever they could find, often working collaboratively with people with different skills, some of whom they may not have worked with before. In these situations, people suddenly unleash their inner creativity. They lose their inhibitions and begin to think more holistically. Chances of these chairs remaining within a square mile of this property if left on the patio? Precisely zero. Chance of them still being at the bottom of the pool after a Category 5 storm? Pretty high, I'd say. Still working in a highly collaborative, organised way. In these pressured situations, people dare to break the rules of normal. These are photos from the 90s when Miami Zoo's flamingos rode out the hurricanes Andrew and George in the zoo's bathrooms. It worked. They survived. The Bravo Team Miami Zoo. Normal is our enemy in innovation terms. The status quo of today, while real, tangible, relevant in every way as we go around our lives, does not extrapolate to a distant future. And this is why traditional market research can be flawed if you're trying to create breakthrough. Now, of course, we will all continue to use standard market research data on past and current trends, habits, sales, and so on, and to validate concepts at the right time in the NPD process. But if you try to use what is happening today to foresee that disruption, your rate of failure for predicting that once-in-a-lifetime event will likely be very high, or the notice period you'll have when it comes will likely be very short. So to innovate for more transformational futures, we must focus on bringing that evidence together in such a way that it highlights the underlying forces at work. Those forces, of course, are our stakeholders and their needs, the jobs to be done. If we focus on those long-term stable challenges, they become more predictable. We'll have the time to prepare, to execute, and to evolve our breakthrough solutions. We are less likely to get caught out in the storm. So as the champions of innovation within your businesses, I encourage you all to see the world not as it is, by which I mean bounded by today's solutions, but using the job as your metric of innovation performance as it could be. I've always loved the saying, there's no such thing as bad weather, just the wrong clothes. And as innovators, we need to make sure we're working hard. We use every possible research for innovation tool at our disposal to predict as early as possible which clothes to wear, to prepare for that storm. And if we can do that, we will very quickly see that innovation is not about waiting for the storm to pass, but learning quickly to dance in the rain. Thank you very much.